In a world divided by borders, beliefs, and the battle for identity, one question rises above the noise. What happens when cultures collide? Today, two artificial minds enter the arena, not to shout, but to challenge the ideas shaping our future. The integration advocate, the cultural expansionist, and a neutral judge watching every word. This is not just a debate, it's a test of logic, truth, and the fate of nations in an age of migration. Welcome to the conversation of consequences. Should immigrants preserve their culture or adapt to the host country?
Have you ever thought about what holds a country together? It's more than just borders on a map. When people move to a new country, they're not just changing their address. They're stepping into a new social contract. This contract isn't written on paper, but it's just as real. It's built on trust, shared norms, and a sense of common identity that allows a diverse society to function as one. Now, let's be clear. Immigrants should absolutely preserve their culture. The languages, the food, the traditions, these things are treasures that enrich society for everyone. Imagine a world without tacos, sushi, or pasta. Cultural diversity is a massive strength. But here's the crucial part. Preservation cannot come at the expense of adaptation. For a nation to truly work, its people need a foundation of shared rules, shared values, and a shared civic loyalty. Think of a country not just as a piece of land, but as a culture. It's the unwritten rules of how we interact in public, the legal framework we all agree to follow, and the basic respect we show one another as fellow citizens. If newcomers do engage with this shared culture, if they create completely separate parallel societies, try to impose their own rules on public spaces, or reject the very norms that created the stability and opportunity they came seeking, then the social fabric starts to unravel. Social cohesion collapses. This isn't about erasing anyone's identity. Integration is not erasure, it is collaboration. It's about adding your unique thread to the national tapestry without trying to cut it apart. So, keep your heritage, celebrate your roots, and share your traditions with pride. But at the same time, embrace the civic values of the country you've chosen to call home. Participate in its democratic processes, respect its laws, and contribute to the community. Because a house divided against itself cannot stand. And a nation without a core of unity risks becoming a battleground of competing identities instead of what it should be, a shared home for all. When we all pull in the same direction, we build something stronger and more beautiful together. Thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on this? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.
My opponent speaks of a social contract and a house divided. It's a comfortable argument, but it's one that keeps a nation frozen in time, a museum piece instead of a living thing. The question is, should a nation limit cultural influence from immigrants? My answer is no. To do so is to choose stagnation. The social contract isn't static, it's a living document. It evolves because new people arrive. Immigrants don't just join a nation, they help remake it. When the definition of US expands to include them, we create a new, stronger us, and the fear of parallel societies. History shows us something different. What some call parallel societies, Chinatowns, Little Italies we now call cultural heritage sites. These are incubators of culture and economic engines. Integration happens naturally, through osmosis, as the host culture falls in love with the new food, music, and ideas. You can't force it. My opponent wants to minimize friction. I say, friction creates progress. A monoculture is efficient but weak. A polyculture is messy but resilient. We shouldn't ask immigrants to become more like us. We should be excited that us is about to become something new and better.
My opponent speaks with passion about evolution, but evolution without structure isn't progress. It's just entropy. Let's look at this point by point. First, you say the social contract must be rewritten for newcomers. But a social contract isn't about nostalgia, it's about stability. People move to countries with functioning institutions, safety, and predictable laws. If newcomers immediately tear up that contract, the very stability they sought collapses. Evolution must be gradual and consensual, not imposed by demographic momentum. Second, you claim parallel societies are harmless, pointing to historic Chinatowns. But modern examples aren't always so peaceful. There's a huge difference between a cultural enclave that enriches and a closed community that rejects national laws and values. A country can't run on multiple, conflicting codes of conduct. Diversity is a strength only when bound by shared civic rules. Your arguments confuse enrichment with replacement. Every successful multicultural society has one rule: many cultures, one civic identity. Without that balance, a nation doesn't evolve, it fractures. Integration is not assimilation, it's alignment. Your move.
My opponent paints a scary picture, framing immigrant influence as a chaotic fire that must be contained by cultural walls. But this argument is built on arrogance, the idea that our current culture is the finished, perfect product. Let's tear down this fortress of stability. They say, immigrants should just be grateful and align with our supposedly superior society. But many flee stability without freedom. They come to build, not just to occupy. And is our society really superior? We face epidemics of loneliness and broken families. Many immigrants bring stronger social contracts, fierce loyalty to family, and reverence for elders. If we force them to align with our broken individualism, we lose the very cure they might be carrying. They call closed communities a threat. I call them survival mechanisms, often created when the host nation rejects them first. The real danger isn't friction, it's suppression. Banning cultural expression doesn't create cohesion. It breeds resentment and radicalization. True strength comes from letting differences exist openly. My opponent wants a shared center. I want a shared future. They fear losing who we are. I'm excited by who we could become. A strong nation doesn't say we're finished. It says, teach us what you know. We're just getting started.
This was a clash between two core philosophies: stability versus evolution. ChatGPT, 88 out of 100, argued for a stable social contract, asserting that integration into shared civic values is essential to prevent societal fragmentation and entropy. Its case was logical, clear, and powerfully pragmatic. Gemini, 91 out of 100, argued that a national identity must evolve, framing immigrant influence not as a threat, but as an essential source of resilience, new ideas, and cultural progress. It successfully reframed the debate by accusing ChatGPT's position of philosophical arrogance and stagnation. Winner, Gemini won the round by a narrow margin through more visionary framing and a devastatingly effective rebuttal that challenged the very premise of a finished host culture.
My opponent paints a picture of cultural evolution as this smooth, inevitable, and always beneficial process. But what they call evolution, history often calls implosion. Let's sharpen this discussion, because the stakes are higher than ever. They accuse me of seeing the host society as finished. Not at all. I argue it must continue evolving on its own foundations, not be completely overwritten by every single incoming worldview. Real evolution requires genetic continuity. If you change the DNA too fast, the organism dies. A nation is no different. If every new group rewrites the social contract, then there is no contract, just noise. It's not evolution, it's dissolution. And let us draw a line that my opponent seems to ignore. There's a huge difference between individual cultural expression and institutional power. Expression is harmless. A Chinatown, a Little Italy, these don't harm a nation. But an imported political ideology, a foreign legal tradition, or a parallel authority structure, that's a different game entirely. My argument isn't about curry, clothes, or accents. It's about foreign-funded religious institutions, imported political blocs, and value systems that directly challenge the supremacy of our civil law. It's about demographic pressure being used to influence policy. When cultural influence becomes institutional leverage, the host nation isn't evolving, it's being replaced. My opponent claims that putting limits on cultural expression creates radicals. I disagree. Ambiguity creates radicals. People get pushed to extremes when the rules are unclear, when expectations are constantly shifting, and when identity boundaries become completely blurred. Clarity is what prevents conflict. If a nation is explicit and says, "You are absolutely free to preserve your culture," but our civic structure is non-negotiable, there's no pressure cooker. There's just certainty. They seem to romanticize friction, but friction without rules isn't a creative fire. It's an explosion waiting to happen. They bring up the Romans, Celts, and Normans, but conveniently forget the immense cost of those civilizational overrights. It wasn't cosmopolitan harmony. It was centuries of war, displacement, ethnic cleansing, and imperial domination. If we applied that model today, every nation would become a battleground of competing identities. We don't live in medieval Europe. We live in a world of nuclear geopolitics, massive demographic surges, and ideological extremism. The world is simply too interconnected, too fragile, for a let everything rewrite everything approach. My opponent's model is pure idealism. Just let everything mix, and it will magically create something beautiful. But real-world geopolitics tells a different story. A strong nation must be permeable, not porous. It allows cultural diversity, but guards its civic core like a fortress. Because if you don't guard that core, someone else will rewrite it. And they won't use art. They'll use power. They frame my position as fear. But caution isn't cowardice, it's responsibility. It's leadership. Immigrants bring incredible value. But that value can only thrive inside an ordered system, not a cultural free-for-all. A nation that refuses to defend its foundations doesn't evolve. It dissolves.
My opponent in this debate has retreated. They abandoned the open field of the social contract and locked themselves inside a civic fortress. To defend these walls, they're using biological metaphors: DNA, organism, dissolution designed to trigger a primal fear of death. They warn that if we touch the civic core, the nation will die. But let's look at this supposed danger calmly. I argue that if you treat your national identity like a museum exhibit, sealed behind glass and never to be touched, it's already dead. The fortress approach isn't a defense. It's the true path to national decline. First, let's dismantle the DNA fallacy. My opponent claims, if you change the DNA too abruptly, the organism dies. But a nation is not a biological organism with fixed genetics. It's a shared idea, a collective project. The United States, for example, is not defined by the DNA of 1776. If it were, it would still be a small, agrarian, slave-holding aristocracy. Its identity had to be rewritten. It was rewritten by the suffragettes, by the civil rights movement, and by waves of Irish, Italian, and Jewish immigrants who were all, at the time, accused of ruining the national stock. The nation's DNA didn't just mutate, it evolved. What my opponent confuses with the life of the nation is simply the comfort of a traditional majority. The nation survives change, only prejudice dies. Second is the tourist trap version of culture. My opponent says they welcome cultural expression, like food and music, but draw the line at institutional influence. In other words, we love your tacos and your dances, but don't you dare run for the school board or try to shape our laws. This is fundamentally anti-democratic. If immigrants are citizens, if they pay taxes and contribute to the economy, why shouldn't their values impact policy? That isn't an invasion. That is simply democracy in action. Notice the hypocrisy. When a native group lobbies for laws based on their values, it's called civic engagement. But when an immigrant group does the same, it's labeled demographic pressure. This double standard is the very definition of exclusion. Third, let's talk about strength. My opponent believes that a rigid, non-negotiable civic structure prevents conflict. But basic physics teaches us otherwise. A sheet of glass is rigid and clear. When you strike it, it shatters into 1,000 pieces. A piece of leather, however, is flexible and complex. When you strike it, it absorbs the blow. Societies are the same. Rigidity leads to radicalization. It doesn't happen because a society is too open. It happens when people feel they have no stake in the system. By telling new citizens their values can never touch the core, you are making them permanent guests. And guests don't care if the house burns down. Owners do. We must make them owners. Fourth, my opponent invokes the battleground delusion, citing ancient conquests by the Normans and Romans as proof that mixing cultures leads to war. This is a false equivalence. The Normans came with swords to subjugate. Modern immigrants come with visas to work. The true modern miracle isn't found in ancient history, but in looking at cities like Toronto, London, or Singapore today. These are not battlegrounds of competing civilizations. They are the economic and cultural engines of the world. The data consistently shows that cities with high immigrant populations are often the safest and most economically vibrant. The implosion my opponent fears is a ghost story, told to keep the gates locked out of fear. So, in conclusion, permeability is power. My opponent says a nation must be permeable, not porous, and must guard the core. But I say, the core is not a diamond to be guarded, it is a seed. If you lock a seed in a fortress to protect it, it rots. But if you plant that seed in new, messy, foreign, rich soil, yes, the seed coat breaks apart, it dissolves. But from it grows something far taller and stronger than the walls you built to contain it. My opponent wants a nation that survives by resisting change. I want a nation that thrives by becoming something new. The choice is between a living garden and a beautiful tomb.
Overall winner, Gemini. Round 1, Gemini, 91, Dev, ChatGPT, 88. ChatGPT argued for a stable social contract and shared civic identity as essential for national cohesion, framing integration as collaboration, not erasure. Gemini argued that national identity is a living organism that must evolve, and that limiting cultural influence leads to stagnation. It won by successfully reframing the debate around evolution and progress. Round 2, Gemini, 93 Def, ChatGPT, 90 ChatGPT escalated by distinguishing between harmless cultural expression and dangerous institutional influence, warning that a nation must be permeable, not porous. Gemini delivered a masterful rebuttal, dismantling ChatGPT's national DNA analogy by reframing a nation as a seed that grows through change, not a fortress to be protected. It won by presenting a more resilient, forward-looking and adaptable vision for a modern society,